I made a video recently in which I talked about the fact that many boxing fans are incapable of being impartial or objective when they make predictions for fights involving some of their favorite fighters and when they make assessments about the ability of certain fighters and their career achievements. But what do I mean by impartial or objective? Surely everyone's perception of a fighter is inescapably subjective, right? One person might look at a fighter being very defensive in the ring and conclude that the fighter is scared, while another person might conclude that the fighter is crafty. It's subjective. Boxing fans are not all equally knowledgeable about every fighter, nor are they equally adept at reading the body language of every fighter. This is true, but that's not what I'm alluding to. I'm alluding to the fact that with many people, their perceptions are heavily influenced by desired outcomes. For example, if you'd asked a diehard Kubrat Pulev fan the day before the Joshua fight whether Pulev was going to win, they'd almost certainly have said yes. But if they'd grown up in Watford rather than Bulgaria and were a diehard Anthony Joshua fan instead, they'd have picked AJ. Most boxing fans are like this. Their perceptions are heavily skewed and their predictions are heavily influenced by desired outcomes. They let their hearts rule their heads. They let their emotions supersede their intellect. They are incapable of impartial analysis when it comes to certain fighters, and because of this, they assume that everyone else is equally incapable. They project their psychological deficiencies onto other people. Therefore, when they hear someone predicting one of their favorite fighters will lose, they automatically assume that that person wants their fighter to lose. They assume that that person hates their fighter. They never consider the possibility that that person may actually like their fighter, but simply wasn't allowing a desired outcome to influence their prediction. Their minds are very binary, very black and white. There are no shades of gray with these people. In their minds, you're either a fan or you're a hater. There's nothing in between. This leads to some highly irrational behavior. For example, if you make 99 videos in which you're very complimentary about one of their favorite fighters, but then make one video where you're critical of that fighter, they completely disregard the previous 99 videos and accuse you of being a hater based upon that one video. And the reverse is often true as well. If you make 99 videos being highly critical of a fighter they dislike, as soon as you make one video being complimentary of that fighter, they accuse you of being a fanboy. It's extremely irrational, but that's what they're like. They project their own psychological state onto you. They only compliment fighters who they like, and they only criticize fighters who they dislike. And they assume that you are exactly the same. The only time when they're capable of impartial analysis is when they're talking about fighters they feel indifferent about, fighters who they neither like nor dislike. But this is relatively rare because they tend to just ignore fighters they feel impartial about and only focus on fighters they feel strongly about one way or the other. I can give you some examples from the comments section of a recent video I made about Dillian Whyte, where I was talking about the possibility of him fighting Wilder, Ruiz, or Ortiz. First of all, you've got this guy who says, "Hatman, it's fully clear you don't like Dillian Whyte. You're against everything he does." He completely ignores the fact that I've praised Dillian Whyte in my videos for years. I've talked about the strength of his resume, and I've constantly criticized Deontay Wilder for avoiding him. But this guy ignores all that and instead concludes that I'm a hater simply because I picked Wilder and Ruiz to beat him. Then, if you scroll down the comments, on the very same video, you've got this guy. He says, "Your bias is showing. You're a typical Matchroom fanboy." Now, I've just picked Wilder and Ruiz to beat Dillian Whyte. But just because I scored the Povetkin fight differently to him, he calls me a Matchroom fanboy. I mean, you've got to laugh. These are two classic examples of what I talked about earlier. These are individuals who project their own biases and their own intellectual deficiencies onto other people. A thief never trusts anyone because he believes that everyone else is as devious as he is. And that's what these people are like. No boxer is perfect. They all have strengths. They all have weaknesses, both in the ring and outside the ring. They're not angelic beings. None of us are. Therefore, if you're being impartial and objective, you're not solely going to focus on their strengths and completely ignore their weaknesses. You're not going to praise all the good things they do and completely ignore the bad. No, you're going to look at both sides. That's what being objective is all about. Dillian Whyte himself, in a Boxing Social interview, which many of you have seen, said that Hatman's a funny one. Sometimes he says good things about me, but other times he criticizes me. That's because I'm objective. That's because I'm not a fanboy of any fighter. For many years, my motto on this channel has been, no fighter is below praise and no fighter is above criticism. That's the entire ethos of what I do here. So if you're hoping that I'm never going to criticize your favorite fighters, or I'm never going to praise the fighters you hate, you've come to the wrong place. I don't know what else to tell you. Now, obviously, a fighter's strengths and weaknesses and their good and bad deeds are not equally balanced in perpetuity. Some fighters have more strengths than weaknesses. Some fighters do more good than bad, and that is reflected in my videos. But if that dynamic changes, then my videos reflect that change. For example, when Deontay Wilder was a contender and in his early years as champion, I gave him far more praise than I did criticism. I'm not lying. Go back and look at my old Deontay Wilder videos. They're still up. But when he started constantly lying and ducking and overhyping his own resume, I began to criticize him more. Because that's what his actions called for. Same with promoters, or in the case of Al Heyman, advisors, quote unquote. When PBC first launched, I was praising them to high heaven. The videos are still up. Go look. I loved the fact that they were flooding the market with free boxing. And they were having boxing on multiple different networks. But as soon as they started blocking a lot of cross-promotional fights, and their fighters were coming out with this cross-the-street nonsense, I became a lot more critical. Because that's what their hand called for. When PBC start doing more good things, I become more complimentary again. It's very straightforward. My loyalty is to the sport itself, not to any fighter or promoter. When I make a prediction, it is not influenced by a desired outcome. It's completely dispassionate. Emotion is not involved. I predict with my head, not with my heart. It doesn't matter how obnoxious a fighter might be. If I think he's going to win, then I'll say it, and vice versa. A couple years ago, when I was still on Twitter, and no, I'm never going back to Twitter. I'm never going back to Facebook. Those platforms are dead at this point, as far as I'm concerned. But a couple years ago, when I was still on Twitter, I was contacted by Lawrence Okolie. He told me that he watches my videos, he likes my videos, and he likes the constructive criticism that I had for him after his fights. And he ended one of the messages by saying, "Don't feel afraid to criticize me just because I reached out." Most fighters don't have that attitude. Most fighters, if you pick them to lose, or if you criticize something about their performance or something about their technique, they take it personally. They think that you're picking them to lose or you're criticizing their technique because you've got something against them. The majority of them who I've had any dealings with, and through observing other people who have interviewed fighters, like I say, they take it personally when you criticize, even if you're not coming from a place of hostility. You see, they assume that you must be. I'll give you an example of this. And because they assume that you must be, because they themselves a lot of the time are projecting their own mentality onto you. So an example would be Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury has picked against Anthony Joshua, and his dad, John. They've both picked against Anthony Joshua on multiple occasions throughout Anthony Joshua's career. One of the most famous instances of this was when Tyson Fury and his dad, John, picked Charles Martin to beat Anthony Joshua. Tyson Fury actually put money down on the fight, and they were absolutely adamant that Charles Martin was going to do the business. Now, do you sincerely believe that they simply picked Charles Martin to win because, completely dispassionately, all bias aside, just looking at the fight objectively, they honestly felt that Martin was a massive favorite to beat AJ in their minds when they broke it down? Of course not. It was wishful thinking. That prediction was based upon a desired outcome. They didn't like the fact that Anthony Joshua had all this support, had all this backing from Sky. Tyson Fury had gone out there to beat Germany, gone out to Germany to beat Vladimir Klitschko, not Anthony Joshua. So they resented the fact that AJ was getting to fight for one of Tyson Fury's belts. You know, that's the way Tyson Fury saw it. That's how his dad saw it. So it was wishful thinking on their behalf that led them to picking Charles Martin. They were betting with their hearts and not their heads. You see? And that is a projection of their mentality. Because when they see somebody pick against them, when they see somebody pick Tyson Fury to lose, they take it as a personal insult. Look at John Fury. When people have picked Tyson to lose, when people like David Haye have picked Tyson to lose, he gets upset about it. You start saying, "Oh yeah, I know you're a Joshua fan and I know this, that, and the other, but you know, I know you're a Wilder fan." This is what he kept saying to David Haye when he was picking against Tyson Fury. It never crossed his mind that maybe David Haye just genuinely believes that his prediction is not based upon a desired outcome. It's just based upon dispassionate analysis. Now, his analysis could be wrong. Same goes for me. Just because I don't base my predictions on a desired outcome doesn't mean my predictions can't be wrong. Of course, I got plenty of predictions wrong, just like everybody else. But I get mine wrong because my perception was off, my analysis was off, or whatever the case may be. I don't bet with my heart. I don't make predictions with my heart. I always go with my head. My head's not always right, of course, but that's where it's coming from. Whereas with the Furies, a lot of the time, it's coming from their heart. It's coming from a desired outcome. That's what their predictions are based on. This is why they have picked against Anthony Joshua so many times. This is why John Fury gets offended when people pick against his son. He gets angry. And Tyson does too, to a lesser degree. You see? This is making predictions based upon desired outcomes. This is what the majority of boxing fans do. And because they are like that, they assume everybody's like that. They assume that when you're picking against their fighter, you must hate their fighter. There's some kind of hidden agenda because they make predictions with a hidden agenda. You see it? So, to sum up, this is what you need to understand. If you're coming to my channel for the first time, you're trying to assess what I'm all about here. I'm not the typical boxing channel. Most boxing channels, they're like fanboys. That's no disrespect to them. I'm just being descriptive. They're like fanboys. They get behind certain fighters, get behind certain promoters. They're against certain fighters, against other promoters. And that situation never changes. With me, it's always in flux. No fighter is below praise and no fighter is above criticism. That's my motto on this channel. So one day I could be praising a guy. The next day I'm criticizing him heavily. Why? Because of his actions. His actions dictated that I must change from praise to criticism. And some fans, look at that. Oh my God, you're so disloyal to this fighter. I was never loyal to that fighter to begin with. I'm a boxing fan. I'm loyal to the sport. Certain fighters do a lot of good in the game. That's great. I'll praise them for that as long as they're doing good in the game. But as soon as they start doing bad for the game, then they're going to get all the criticism. This is what I'm objective about. I'm not afraid to criticize any fighter. I don't look at a fighter's performance and project what I want that performance to be. I look at the performance dispassionately and try and see it for what it actually was, at least from my analytical perspective. So whereby people saw an amazing virtuoso performance by AJ in the Kubrat Pulev fight, I saw a good performance, and I said that several times, but I also saw vulnerability there. I saw a guy who's not as sure of himself now as he was pre-Ruiz 1. I saw a guy who's still dealing with demons. As Teddy Atlas said, there are still ghosts in Anthony Joshua's attic, the ghosts of Andy Ruiz. It's clear to see if you have the ability to be dispassionate. But again, most people's perceptions are colored by desired outcomes, by a desired reality rather than the actual reality. The desired reality for a lot of these people is that AJ has no demons. He's a superhuman. None of the knockdowns against Andy Ruiz or the experience surrounding that has traumatized him whatsoever. And he's just as confident, if not more now than he was. This is what they want to believe. But my observations are telling me something different. They're telling Teddy Atlas something different. They're telling, many other people, Ben Davison and Dylan White and other people something different. And the same goes for Dylan White. I'm not basing my assessment of Dylan White upon any issue I have with Dylan. I got no issue with Dylan. I think Dylan's great for the game. Here's me criticizing Deontay Wilder for years for not fighting Dylan White. Now only to be called a Dylan White hater. It's just extraordinary. Just because I pick Wilder over White, which I always have. That's never changed. And also because I'm unsure of how Dylan White's going to get over the Povetkin knockout. That is simply based on what I've seen before in boxing. If a fighter as great as Lennox Lewis could be gun shy after coming back from a knockout defeat against Oliver McCall, then, you have to imagine lots of fighters could become gun shy. And I've seen many, many fighters over the years become gun shy after knockout defeats. And even the fighters who are not gun shy necessarily, they usually, especially in their first or second fights back, and I'm talking about real fights back against proper opposition, they usually show vulnerability in terms of punch resistance. They usually show a deterioration in terms of their punch resistance. So what am I supposed to do? Ignore all that experience and say, oh no, Dylan White's not going to be like that. He's going to be one of the rare exceptions where he has no ill effects from the punch resistance in the punch resistance department at all after coming back from a devastating knockout defeat, his second devastating knockout defeat. I'm supposed to ignore all that and just believe blindly that Dylan White is going to be the rare exception. Despite the fact that after the AJ knockout, when Dylan White lost to AJ, as far as I can tell, his punch resistance deteriorated after that. Look at the shots he took against AJ. prior to that 7th round. Look at the shots and he wasn't going down. And then look at the shots he took against people like Joseph Parker, Hellenius, Povetkin, who else? Marius Wack. These guys were hurting him. These guys were dropping him. Oscar Rivas. As far as I can tell, just looking at it dispassionately, he doesn't have the same punch resistance now that he did before that AJ knockout. So, on a conscious level, Dillian Whyte might still be feeling confident. But on a subconscious level, has something changed? Did something change through that experience of getting knocked out by AJ, which led him to have decreased punch resistance moving forward? Maybe it's a neurological change. See, the brain is a very complex thing. The trauma of a knockout defeat like that could change the way the brain functions slightly, change the way the brain reacts slightly. And that could lead to decreased punch resistance. I don't know. I'm not a neurologist. There probably hasn't been enough studies into stuff like this done. I don't know. But all I know is what I'm observing. And what I'm observing is that Dillian Whyte's punch resistance is not the same now as it was prior to the AJ fight. And therefore, now he's been knocked out again by Povetkin. Yeah, he's coming out confident and all this kind of stuff. Great. But I'm just trying to follow logic here. It's nothing personal against Dillian Whyte. I'm just trying to follow logic here. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I've got no problem if I'm wrong. All right? This is not me projecting what I want to happen. I don't want Dillian Whyte to have less punch resistance than before. I'm just going off what I've observed. It's nothing personal. This is what a lot of boxing fans just can't seem to wrap their heads around. Right? What I do here is objective, dispassionate analysis. That's what I do. It's not about who I want to win. It's about who I genuinely think is going to win when I look at a fight dispassionately. It's not about pointing out weaknesses because I hate the fighter. No, it's not, nothing to do with that. All fighters have got weaknesses. It's about pointing out weaknesses because I have to take those weaknesses into account moving forward when it comes to predicting future fights. That's what it's about. Nothing personal against the fighter at all. If you can't get your head around this concept, you're in the wrong place. You need to go to one of those channels who dogmatically supports the fighter that you like, no matter what. Never criticize them. Always make out as though they've got everything in control, that they're superhuman, that they have no psychological weaknesses at all. Go to one of those. There's plenty of channels like that out there. Go to one of those channels. You'll enjoy it a lot more. Because over here, you're going to be confused. You're going to be upset. You're going to be angry. Because you won't understand why one day I'm praising your guy and the next day I'm criticizing his performance and I'm saying, well, he shouldn't have turned down that fight, should have taken this fight if he's really about what he says he's about, and so on. You'll be confused. Objectivity will upset you. So don't stay here or come here if that's the kind of person you are. But for the rest of you, especially new subscribers, welcome aboard. And let's have some great discussions and debates about boxing, various different fighters, in a respectful, dispassionate, intelligent way. Come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide range of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&A sessions, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got a Discord server where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. There's no contract, no commitment, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.